Picture this. It's 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in 1974. A young medical student in Chicago wakes up from a nightmare, drenched in sweat. He decides to skip his early morning shift at the hospital, something he's never done before. That same morning, a fire breaks out in the very wing where he would have been working. 3 nurses died in that fire. The student's name was Marcus Chun, and he would spend the next 40 years asking himself one question. Was skipping work that morning a choice, or was it destiny? Welcome back to Logic Over Spirit. Today, we're diving into one of humanity's oldest and most haunting questions. Are our lives already written in some cosmic book? Is every decision you've ever made actually predetermined? Or do we truly have the power to shape our own destinies? This isn't just philosophical daydreaming. The question of destiny versus free will touches the very core of what it means to be human. It affects how we view justice, how we assign responsibility, how we make decisions, and ultimately, how we find meaning in our existence. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to explore this question from 3 distinct angles. We'll examine what science tells us about determinism and the nature of causality. We'll dive into how different religions have grappled with predestination and divine will. And we'll explore the philosophical debates that have raged for thousands of years about freedom and fate. By the end of this video, you might not have a definitive answer, but you'll understand the question in a way you never have before. And that understanding might change how you see every choice you make from this moment forward. Chapter 1. The Scientific Case for Determinism. Let's start with the most uncomfortable truth that modern science has to offer. The universe appears to be governed by laws. Physical laws that don't bend, don't break, and don't make exceptions. Think about it this way. If you drop a ball, it falls. Every single time, it doesn't decide to fall. It doesn't choose gravity. The laws of physics make falling inevitable. Now here's where it gets interesting. Your brain is made of atoms. Those atoms follow the same physical laws as everything else in the universe. In the 19th century, a French mathematician named Pierre-Simon Laplace proposed something radical. He suggested that if an intelligence could know the precise location and momentum of every atom in the universe, it could calculate the entire future and reconstruct the entire past. He wrote, "We ought to regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its anterior state, and as the cause of the one which is to follow." This became known as Laplace's demon, and it painted a picture of a clockwork universe where everything that will ever happen has already been determined by everything that came before. Your choices, your thoughts, your feelings, everything is just atoms following the rules. Modern neuroscience has added fuel to this fire. Benjamin Liebig's famous experiments in the 1980s showed something startling. When people decided to press a button, brain activity associated with that decision began about half a second before they consciously felt they had made the choice. The decision was already happening in their brain before they were aware of deciding. More recent studies have pushed this even further. Researchers can now predict simple decisions up to 7 seconds before people report being aware of making them. 7 seconds. That's an eternity in brain time. If your brain has already made a decision 7 seconds before you're aware of it, in what sense did you make that decision at all? But wait, there's a twist in this story, and it comes from quantum mechanics. At the quantum level, the universe stops being a clockwork and starts being a probability cloud. Particles don't have definite positions until they're measured. Events at the quantum level appear to be genuinely random, not just unpredictable but actually causeless. Does this save free will? Not really. Random is not the same as free. If your decisions are determined by quantum randomness, you're not really in control either. You're just a different kind of puppet, dancing to the tune of probability rather than the tune of deterministic laws. Physicist Sean Carroll put it this way: the laws of physics underlying everyday life are completely known, and those laws don't leave room for some supernatural force called free will to reach in and change what was going to happen anyway. So science seems to tell us that we either determined by the past or randomized by quantum effects. Neither option looks much like the freedom we think we have. Chapter 2. Religion and the Paradox of Divine Foreknowledge. Now let's shift gears and look at how religion deals with this question. And here's where things get really complicated, because most religions want to have it both ways. They want an all-knowing God and human free will at the same time. In Christianity, this tension is everywhere. The Bible contains verses that seem to support predestination. In Romans 8:29 and 30, Paul writes about those God predestined and called. In Ephesians 1-4 and 5, he speaks of being chosen before the creation of the world. John Calvin took these ideas and ran with them, developing the doctrine of predestination to its logical extreme. Some people are chosen for salvation, others for damnation, and this was decided before they were even born. But the Bible also talks constantly about choice. Choose this day whom you will serve, Joshua tells the Israelites. The entire concept of sin and redemption seems to require that humans have genuine choices. If God has already decided who's saved and who's damned, why all the commands and moral teachings? Augustine of Hippo wrestled with this for years. He concluded that God's foreknowledge doesn't cause our choices, but he knows what we will freely choose. But think about that for a moment. If God created the universe, knowing everything that would ever happen, including every choice you would make, and he could have created it differently, how are your choices really free? Islam faces the same paradox. The Quran speaks repeatedly of Allah's complete knowledge and control. Not a leaf falls, but he knows it. Yet humans are held accountable for their actions on the Day of Judgment. How can you be judged for actions that were predestined? Islamic scholars developed the concept of qadar, divine destiny. Al-Ghazali tried to resolve the paradox by distinguishing between Allah's knowledge of what will happen and Allah causing it to happen. But the distinction gets philosophically murky. If Allah creates every moment, including your thoughts and intentions, in what sense are they yours? Hinduism and Buddhism approach this differently. In Hindu philosophy, karma isn't about punishment from a god. It's a natural law of cause and effect. Your actions have consequences, not because someone is judging you, but because that's how reality works. But here's the interesting part. The ultimate goal in Hinduism is moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. And that liberation involves realizing that the individual self is an illusion. The Atman, your true nature, is identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. So in one sense, Hindu philosophy says yes, everything is predetermined by karma. But in another sense, it says the you who thinks they're making choices is an illusion anyway. The Bhagavad Gita captures this paradox when Krishna tells Arjuna, "The spirit is beyond destruction, therefore fight." You're not the doer, and yet you must act. Buddhism takes this even further. The doctrine of anatta, no self, suggests there's no permanent, unchanging self that could be free or determined. There's just a stream of consciousness, constantly changing, arising, and passing away according to causes and conditions. The Buddha said, events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. What's fascinating is that across all these religious traditions, there's an acknowledgement that the simple picture of an autonomous individual making completely free choices doesn't match reality. Even religions that want to preserve moral responsibility have to complicate the story. Chapter 3. The Philosophical Battlefield. Philosophy has been wrestling with determinism and free will for millennia, and philosophers have come up with some creative solutions. Let's explore the main positions. Hard determinism says, everything is caused by prior events, including human actions. Free will is an illusion. This was the position of Baruch Spinoza, who argued that humans are like stones that think. A stone thrown through the air, if it were conscious, might think it was flying freely. But really, it's just following the laws of physics. Spinoza wrote, men think themselves free because they are conscious of their volitions and desires, but are ignorant of the causes whereby they are led to wish and desire. The implications of hard determinism are stark. If no one truly chooses their actions, how can we hold anyone morally responsible? How can we justify punishment? The hard determinist might say we still need to modify behavior, just like we'd fix a broken machine, but we can't claim people deserve punishment in some deep moral sense. Libertarian free will, on the other hand, says that humans have genuine free will that breaks the chain of causation. This was the position of philosophers like Thomas Reid and more recently Robert Caine. They argued that humans are special. We have the power of agent causation. We can start new causal chains. When I choose to raise my hand, that choice isn't fully caused by prior events. It originates with me. The problem is explaining how this works without invoking magic. If your choice isn't caused by your prior thoughts, experiences, desires, and the physical state of your brain, then what is it caused by? And if it's not caused by anything, is it random? Is a random choice really free? Enter compatibilism, the clever middle ground that most modern philosophers have adopted. Compatibilists like Daniel Dennett argue that free will and determinism aren't actually in conflict. We need to redefine what we mean by free will. A choice is free, says the compatibilist, if it flows from your own desires, beliefs, and character, without external coercion. It doesn't matter if those desires and that character were themselves caused by prior events. What matters is that the choice is genuinely yours. Think of it this way. Imagine someone holds a gun to your head and forces you to hand over your wallet. That's not a free choice, even in a determined universe, because it doesn't reflect your actual desires. But if you freely donate money to charity because you care about helping others, that is a free choice, even if your caring nature was shaped by genetics and upbringing. David Hume made this point centuries ago. By liberty, then, we can only mean a power of acting or not acting, according to the determinations of the will. The key is whether your actions flow from your will, not whether your will is itself determined. Dennett pushes this further. He argues that free will isn't an illusion but an evolved ability. Humans can model the future, consider alternatives, and adjust their behavior based on predictions. That's real, that's valuable, and that's what free will actually is. It doesn't require breaking the laws of physics. But not everyone is convinced. Galen Strawson argues that even compatibilist free will requires something impossible. To be truly responsible for your actions, you'd need to be responsible for your character and desires. But those were shaped by factors outside your control, your genes, your upbringing, your environment. To be responsible for those, you'd need to have chosen them. But that requires having a character before you have a character, which is logically impossible. It's what he calls the impossibility of ultimate responsibility. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Choice. Let's get more personal now. Why does it feel so strongly like we're making free choices if we're not? Why is the illusion so convincing? The answer lies in how our brains work. Your conscious experience arrives late to the party. By the time you're aware of making a decision, your brain has already done most of the work. The neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga discovered something fascinating while studying split-brain patients, people who had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed. When researchers showed images to only one hemisphere and asked the patient to explain why they acted a certain way, the verbal hemisphere would confidently make up reasons, even though it had no access to the actual cause. Gazzaniga called this the interpreter module. Your brain constantly creates narratives to explain your behavior, and those narratives feel true even when they're confabulations. We see this in everyday life. People explain their purchases, their relationships, their career choices with reasons that sound good. But psychological research shows that we're often unaware of the real factors influencing us. The temperature of a room, the time since we last ate, whether we just saw a happy or sad face, these can all affect our decisions without our awareness. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent decades documenting the systematic biases in human decision-making. We're influenced by how options are framed, by what we saw recently, by anchoring effects, by availability heuristics. We think we're rational agents carefully weighing options, but we're actually running on mental shortcuts that were shaped by evolution. And here's the really unsettling part. When psychologists tell people about these biases, they mostly just think, well, other people might fall for that, but not me. We're even biased about our biases. The illusion of free will is remarkably resistant to evidence. Sam Harris, the neuroscientist and philosopher, argues that we should just accept that free will is an illusion. He writes, "The illusion of free will is itself an illusion." What he means is that once you really look closely at your experience, you can notice that thoughts and intentions just appear in consciousness. You don't create them. They arise. Try this experiment right now. Decide to think of an animal. Any animal. Got one. Now ask yourself, why did that specific animal pop into your mind? Where did that thought come from? You might be able to trace some associations. Maybe you saw a dog today, or you like cats. But ultimately, the thought just appeared. You didn't consciously construct it from nothing. If you keep observing your experience this way, the sense of being an author of your thoughts starts to break down. Thoughts think for themselves. Decisions decide themselves. There's an experience happening, but the boundaries between you and your thoughts get fuzzy. This isn't just mysticism. It's what focused introspection reveals. And it matches what neuroscience tells us about the brain. You are your brain, but you're not the CEO consciously controlling everything. You're more like the PR spokesperson for a vast unconscious processing system, and you only get the press releases. Chapter 5. The Practical Consequences. Alright, let's say you're convinced. Free will is an illusion. Everything is determined, or at least your conscious will doesn't have the power you thought it did. So what? How should this change how you live? Some people worry that if we don't believe in free will, society will collapse. Without belief in moral responsibility, why would anyone behave ethically? Why not just do whatever you want if you can't be held accountable? There's some evidence for this concern. Psychological studies have shown that when people are exposed to deterministic messages, they cheat more on tests, they're less helpful to others, and they're more aggressive. Belief in free will seems to correlate with better behavior, at least in the short term. But this might be confusing the map with the territory. Just because belief in free will is useful doesn't make it true. And there are good reasons to think that a society that understands determinism could actually be better, not worse. Consider the criminal justice system. Right now, we punish criminals because we think they deserve it. They could have done otherwise, we say, so they're morally responsible and deserve to suffer. But if determinism is true, this logic collapses. A criminal is, in some sense, unlucky. They got the genes, the upbringing, the brain chemistry that led to criminal behavior. This doesn't mean we release all criminals. We still need to protect society. We still need deterrence. We might still need to confine dangerous people, but the rationale shifts. We're not inflicting suffering because people deserve it. We're doing what's necessary to maintain a functional society and to rehabilitate when possible. Greg Caruso, a philosopher who advocates for what he calls free will skepticism, argues this would lead to a more humane justice system. Less focus on retribution, more focus on public health and prevention. We treat criminal behavior more like we treat infectious disease, as a problem to be solved, not a sin to be punished. On a personal level, letting go of the belief in free will can be liberating. It becomes harder to take credit for your successes, sure, but it also becomes easier to let go of guilt and shame about your failures. You did your best, given the factors that made you who you are, so did everyone else. This can increase compassion. When you understand that everyone is doing what they were doing because of a vast web of causes stretching back before their birth, it's harder to hate people, harder to feel superior. You got lucky in some ways, others got unlucky. We're all just happening. But here's the paradox. Even if free will is an illusion, you can't live as if it is. Try making a decision while simultaneously believing you're not really making it. Try deliberating about options while holding firmly in mind that what you'll choose is already determined. It's nearly impossible. The illusion persists even when you know it's an illusion. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we're like the characters in a novel who feel like they're making choices, even though the author has already written the whole story. The experience is real, even if the metaphysics is different than it seems. Dennett makes an interesting point here. He says the question isn't whether free will is compatible with determinism in some abstract sense. The question is whether the kind of freedom we actually care about, the freedom to deliberate, to have our decisions reflect our values, to not be coerced, whether that's compatible with determinism. And it clearly is. Chapter 6. Destiny in Culture and Myth. Humans have been telling stories about fate and destiny for as long as we've been telling stories. And these stories reveal something deep about how we grapple with this question. Greek tragedy is built on the concept of fate. Oedipus tries to escape his destiny and, in trying to escape it, fulfills it exactly. He kills his father and marries his mother just as the oracle predicted. The message is clear. You can't outrun fate. The gods have written the story, and you're going to play your part whether you like it or not. But there's something more subtle happening in these tragedies. Yes, fate is fixed. But the characters still make choices. Oedipus chooses to investigate his origins. Antigone chooses to bury her brother. Their choices matter morally and emotionally, even if the outcome is predetermined. The Greeks seem to understand something that philosophy would take centuries to articulate. Fate and responsibility can coexist. In Norse mythology, even the gods are subject to fate. Odin knows that Ragnarok is coming, that he'll be killed by the Wolf Fenrir, that the world will end in fire and ice. But he fights anyway, he prepares anyway. There's a profound existentialism in Norse mythology. Everything is doomed, but you still have to show up and play your part with courage. Eastern philosophies approach this differently. The Tao Te Ching speaks of Wu Wei, effortless action. The idea is to align yourself with the natural flow of things, to stop trying to force outcomes. This isn't fatalism exactly. It's more like recognizing that you're part of a larger system, and wisdom lies in moving with it rather than against it. Modern stories still wrestle with these themes. The Matrix asks whether the prophecy about Neo is true or if he's just being manipulated. Doctor Strange looks at millions of possible futures and finds only one where the heroes win. Time travel stories constantly play with the question of whether the past can be changed or if attempts to change it just bring about what was always going to happen. What's interesting is how these stories reflect our ambivalence. We're drawn to both sides. We love the idea of the hero who defies fate, who proves everyone wrong, who makes the impossible choice. But we're also drawn to the idea of destiny, of having a special purpose, of being part of a grand plan. Maybe this reflects a deep truth about human psychology. We want meaning and we want agency. Destiny provides meaning. Your life matters, you have a role to play. Free will provides agency. You're in control. You can change things. The tension between them is the tension between wanting to matter and wanting to be free. Chapter 7. The Quantum Loophole. We touched on quantum mechanics earlier, but let's dive deeper because some people think it offers a way out of determinism. And the truth is more interesting and stranger than you might expect. At the quantum level, particles exist in what's called superposition. An electron doesn't have a definite position until it's measured. It exists in a cloud of probabilities. When you measure it, the wave function collapses and you get a definite result. But which result you get is random. Not just unpredictable, but actually genuinely random with no prior cause determining it. Some philosophers and physicists have wondered, could this randomness be where free will sneaks in? Maybe human consciousness somehow harnesses quantum effects to make genuinely free choices. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff proposed that quantum processes and structures called microtubules in neurons might be the basis of consciousness and free will. It's a fascinating idea, but most neuroscientists are skeptical. The brain is warm and wet, and quantum effects typically get washed out in such environments. Plus, there's no evidence that quantum randomness in neurons could produce the complex, coherent decision-making we associate with free will. But there's something even more profound happening in quantum mechanics that relates to determinism. The many-worlds interpretation, proposed by Hugh Everett, suggests that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split. All possible outcomes actually happen, each in its own branch of reality. Think about the implications. Every time you make a decision, if it has any quantum randomness involved, even indirectly, the universe splits. There's a version of you that chose pizza and a version that chose burgers. Both are real. Both exist in parallel universes. From a deterministic standpoint, this is perfect. Everything is determined. It's just that everything possible is determined to happen in some branch of reality. There's a version of your life where you took that job and a version where you didn't. A version where you said yes and a version where you said no. Is that free will? It certainly doesn't feel like it. Your consciousness follows one path, experiences one branch. You don't get to choose which one. The universe just splits, and you find yourself in one of the results. Sean Carroll, who advocates for the many worlds interpretation, puts it this way. We are part of the quantum wave function of the universe. And that wave function evolves according to a perfectly deterministic equation. No randomness, no freedom, just different branches all unfolding according to the laws. Quantum mechanics doesn't say free will. At best, it gives us random instead of determined. At worst, in the many worlds picture, it gives us both. A deterministic multiverse where every possibility happens. Chapter 8. Living with the Mystery. We've covered a lot of ground. Science suggests determinism or randomness. Religion struggles with the paradox of omniscience and responsibility. Philosophy offers various solutions but no consensus. Culture reflects our ambivalence. Quantum mechanics doesn't help as much as we'd hoped, so where does this leave us? Maybe the most honest answer is that we don't know. Not just that we haven't figured it out yet, but that the question might not have a clear answer. The philosopher Colin McGinn suggests that some problems might be cognitively closed to human minds, that our brains simply aren't built to understand certain aspects of reality. Free will might be one of those mysteries. Or maybe the question itself is confusing. Maybe free will, as we intuitively understand it, is like asking whether sound has a color. it's a category error. The thing we're asking about doesn't exist in the way we think it does. Philosopher Saul Smilansky talks about illusionism, the idea that the belief in free will is an illusion, but it's an important and useful illusion that we should maintain. He argues that society functions better when people believe they have free will, even if philosophers and scientists know they don't. But here's what we can say with confidence. However this metaphysical question shakes out, your experience matters. The deliberation you go through before making important decisions, that's real. The sense of struggling with options, weighing values, trying to be your best self, that's not nothing. If determinism is true, you are the process by which the universe determines what you'll do. Your thoughts, your considerations, your moral reasoning, these are all part of the causal chain. They're not separate from it. So thinking carefully about your choices still matters, even if those choices are determined. And if there's some kind of free will, well, you've got it, so use it wisely. Practically speaking, here's what might be the most useful perspective. Act as if you have free will. Deliberate. Make plans. Try to be good. Hold yourself to standards. But judge yourself and others with the understanding that we're all products of factors we didn't choose. Take credit for your successes with humility. Accept your failures with compassion. The physicist Albert Einstein, who believed in determinism, put it beautifully. I do not believe in free will. Schopenhauer's words. Man can do what he wants, but he cannot do what he wills. Accompany me in all situations throughout my life and reconcile me with the actions of others, even if they are rather painful to me. This awareness of the lack of free will keeps me from taking myself and my fellow men too seriously, as acting and deciding individuals, and from losing my temper. There's wisdom in that. The question of destiny versus free will might be unanswerable, but the wisdom of holding our judgments lightly, of recognizing the limits of our understanding, of maintaining compassion for ourselves and others, that wisdom is available, regardless of the metaphysical truth. Conclusion. So, are our lives already written? Is destiny real? After exploring science, religion, and philosophy, we don't have a simple answer. And maybe that's the point. The scientific evidence suggests that our choices are either determined by prior causes or influenced by randomness, neither of which looks like the freedom we intuitively feel we have. Religion struggles to reconcile an all-knowing God with genuine human choice, though different traditions handle this paradox in different ways. Philosophy offers several solutions, from hard determinism to libertarian free will to compatibilism, but none without problems. What we can say is this. The experience of choosing is real and valuable, even if the metaphysics is uncertain. Your deliberations matter. Your struggles with moral decisions matter. The kind of person you are matters, even if it was determined that you would be that kind of person. Perhaps Marcus Chun, that medical student who skipped work the morning of the fire, didn't really choose to stay home. Perhaps his nightmare was caused by subtle physiological factors that were themselves caused by even earlier factors in an unbroken chain stretching back to the beginning of time. Perhaps in every possible universe, given the same initial conditions, he would always skip work that morning. But he still feels grateful. He still lives with the weight and the gift of that moment. And that experience, determined or free, is what makes us human. The question remains open. And maybe that's where it should stay, not as a failure to find the answer, but as an invitation to hold the mystery, to live with humility, and to treat ourselves and each other with the compassion that comes from recognizing how little we truly understand about why we do what we do. If you found this exploration valuable, hit that like button and subscribe to Logic Over Spirit. Drop a comment below. Do you think we have free will? Has this video changed how you think about your choices? I read every comment, and your perspectives help shape future content. Next week, we're diving into another profound question. Does consciousness create reality? Or does reality create consciousness? The answer might shock you. Until then, keep questioning, keep thinking, and remember, whether your actions are free or determined, they still matter. Make them count. See you in the next one.